Memzaim Amud Base, the Gemara goes into the next din in the Mishnah Ma'aser Sheni v'Hekdesh Niftu, that you can make a zimun on Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe, and holy goods that you've redeemed. Well, of course you can. The Gemara says pshita, that's obvious. The Gemara answers in part 2, what are we dealing with over here? I could go in Shnosnes Aken v'lo Nosnes Achomesh. He gave the principle and he didn't give the extra fifth. When you redeem your own personal, if it's someone else's, you just simply redeem it onto coin. But when you're redeeming your own personal Ma'aser Sheni, you have to add on a fifth to the amount that you give as a redemption. And over here, he didn't add on that fifth. And this is what our Mishnah is coming to teach me when it says that it's talking about Ma'aser Sheni v'Hekdesh Niftu. It means that you redeem them and you paid enough for the principal, but not enough for you didn't add on the extra fifth, and you'd think that as a result that's not called redeemed, and therefore this what's coming to teach me that the extra fifth doesn't prevent you from the redemption process. You just owe it, but it doesn't stop it from being redeemed. Going into the next day in the Mishnah, Shamash Shachal Kazais. We see if the Shamash, the waiter at the meal, eats a Kazais, he can join in the Mezuman. Pshita, that's obvious. Ma'udatema, what would you have thought? Shamash Loikova. This waiter, he's not consistent in the meal, he's not permanently there, he's coming and going, and therefore he's not considered part of the meal to join in the mezuman. Komash Melon comes to teach us, our Mishnah, that that's okay. Now, it's interesting to know what this Komash Melon is. Is it Komash Melon, he is Kavua, or is it Komash Melon, even though he's not Kavua, you can still join him in the zimun? And that would be a big difference in terms of how we look at him, something for you to think about. Kusi Mezamnolov. So the Kusi, we remembered, was a group of people that came to Eretz Yisrael, and there's actually a machloikis in general in the Gemara if they're considered Jewish or not. Essentially, the Gemara seems to assume that they are Jewish, but they don't do lots of things, as we'll soon see. The Gemara asks, why in the world can we join the Kusi into the Zimun, Lo Ya'el Am Haaretz, even if it be something which is much better than a Kusi? What is that? A Jewish Am Haaretz, a Jewish ignoramus, and we'll shortly discover what's called a Jewish, I'm going to use the word Am Haaretz because I'm more comfortable with it, but that means a person that doesn't know something, and we'll see what something he doesn't know shortly. Let him only be an Amoritz. For Tanya, we have a halacha that you can't make a zimun with an Amoritz, and therefore Kusi for sure is worse than an Amoritz. Kasha. Teretz in part 2, Abai Omar B'Kusi Chaver. We're talking about Kusi, who is a Talmid Chacham, and therefore, since he is a Talmid Chacham, we can't join him in the zimun. Rav Amar in part 3, Afilu Taimuk B'Kusi Amoritz. You can talking about Kusi Amoritz. So why is the Kusi Amoritz better off than a Jewish Am Haaretz? And the Am Haaretz that we're referring to in our Mishnah is not the classic Am Haaretz, it's a very specific Am Haaretz. What is it Am Haaretz that we're referring to? It's the Am Haaretz that the rabbis that argue on Rabbi Meir describe. And what is that? As we're about to see, the Sani we learned in the Brachos, Eizehu Am Haaretz. Who's called an Am Haaretz? Kol she'ein oichel chulav b'tara, divrei Rabbi Meir. Anyone that doesn't eat his mundane goods in a state of purity, which is a really massive ask. There were certain tzaddikim in Klal Yisrael that used to make sure that they never contracted tumah when they were eating food, even though that food wasn't holy, and there was no need halachically to act in regard to this food with the laws of purity and impurity. Nevertheless, they did so. So Rabbi Meir says anyone that's not on that level is called an Am Haaretz. And they say a person who's called an Am Haaretz, one who doesn't take tithes from his fruits in the way that they should be. And therefore, since this Am Haaretz that you'd like to join in the Zimun is not trusted on the food that he gives you, so simply speaking, we're talking about you can't join him in because he's eating food which is not permitted to be eaten, and that's the problem over here. It's not a problem with his amaratzus, it's a problem with his food. So now the Gemara goes into part 4, this is all part of 3. V'hanikatoi asuri ma'asri kedechazi. Whereas a kusim are actually better off than the Am Haaretz because they surely take ma'aser. Because that whichever is written in the Torah, they are super stringent. In other words, even though they dispute what the Chachamim say, but if something is actually stated in the Torah, they hold by it very strongly. As the Master says, any mitzvah that the Kusim actually hang on to, they're actually much more exacting in them than the Yisrael. So therefore, a Kusi, we can make sure that since he takes Maaseh, his food is for sure okay, and that's why we can join him in the Zimun. Whereas Amaretz, that doesn't take Maaseh, his food is not okay, that's why we can't join him in on the Zimun, and that draws to close our Gemara. And now we're going to begin with a related Gemara. I'm going to start from scratch because it seems to be a new Gemara, even though there is a lot of mystery surrounding it. Tanu Rabbanan. We learned in the Brachos, and now we're going to have 6 opinions as to what is the definition of an Amaretz. And Rashi says this is the Amaretz whenever whenever we see in the Gemara, Amaretz, in general, this is who we're referring to. That's a dispute amongst us tonight. The Stam Amaretz, who is he? Who's the Stam Amaretz that we mentioned throughout Shas? The first opinion is Rebbe Lezer. He says, Kol she'einu koreh Krishma Arvis Shachris Divrei Rebbe Lezer. If he doesn't say Shema in the morning and the evening, he's an Amaretz. Rebbe Shua, second opinion, Omer kol she'einu meniach tefillin. He says if he doesn't put on tefillin. Ben Azai, third opinion, Omer kol she'einu lo tzitzis, but big he doesn't have tzitzis on his garment. Rebbe Nosson Omer, fourth opinion, kol she'ein mezuzah al pischa, he doesn't have a mezuzah on his door. Fifth opinion, Rebbe Nosson by Yosef, Omer kol she'esh le'banim ba'einu megadol Talmud Torah. A person has children and he doesn't raise them in the study of Torah. Others say Acherim is generally follows the opinion of Rebbe Meir. It was what the Rebbe Meir learned from his Rebbe Elisha ben Avua, who was then called Acher because after he ascended in a mystical trance to the highest possible paradise, the orchard, he went off the derech. And therefore Reb Meir would follow him around and learn from him, but he never quoted him in his name, he quoted him as Acherim. Acherim oimim afilu kara v'shana, even a person that learns all of Tanakh, that's Kara, Mikra, v'shana, and he learns all of Mishnayos, and he hasn't apprenticed himself as an apprentice to Talmidei Chachamim, to sages. He doesn't have a Rebbe. Harizeh Amaretz is called Amaretz. Now there's an incredibly life-changing Rashi that describes these words, Shemesh Talmidei Chachamim. Rashi doesn't say what we would have expected, that he didn't find himself a Rebbe. He says that he didn't learn Gemara, because Shemesh Talmidei Chachamim is Gemara. Gemara is not a text, it's a process of us understanding how to understand the world, Torah, the Mishnayos. And therefore, the point of the Gemara, Rashi says, Dugumas Gemara Shelanu, that Shemesh Talmidei Chachamim is, our Gemara teaches us not the what alone, but the how and the why is to understand, analyze. And that's why the Gemara invites us to become a participant in the analytic process. And that's why when you're learning Gemara, you now become an actual member of this global and eternal base medrash. Rav Huna says halacha k'acherim, that the halacha holds, the halacha paskin like acherim. Now, this is where the mystery of the Gemara starts out. When Rav Huna says the halacha is k'acherim, does he mean also in regard to our Mishnah? And we're countering what we said above, that the Amaretz referring to the Mishnah is because he's not eating kosher, as it were, food. And Rav Huna is saying, no, even if he's not Shemesh Talmidei Chachamim, even if he's not, can't learn, he's not invited to the Zimun. So, I would think not. I would think this is a general point. The problem is, there's a Tosfos at the top of the page that says, how come today we don't keep this halacha and we just invite anyone to join the Zimun? Now, Tosfos is talking about in Chutz La'aretz, there's no din, Paris, Meiser, and the rest. So Tosfos seems to be saying, and Tosfos is referring to, he goes on Rav Huna, implying that according to Rav Huna, the loch is, if a person is Am Haaretz, he doesn't learn Gemara, he can't be invited to a Zimun. And Tosfos says, well, we're not medactic on this, we don't really keep to this anymore. Which would mean that really what Rav Huna is saying is that the Mishnah is talking about an Am Haaretz, like he says, like the Acherim says, which is actually implied from the following Gemaras, and stick with me as we see. Rabbi Bar Chama didn't invite to a zimun Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa. Why? To Tani Sifra v'Sifri v'Hilchasa, because he learned all the halachic midrashim, but Rami Bar Chama didn't think that he knew Gemara as well. So you see, seemingly, that this is an application of the halacha, that if a person doesn't know Gemara, he can't be invited to Zimun. But what happened was, when Rami Bar Chama passed away, Rava said, Amar Rava, Lo nach nafshei de Rami Bar Chama, ela de lo azmin Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa. It didn't depart the soul of Rami Bar Chama, but because he didn't invite Rav Menashe in his zimun Menashe bar Tachlifa. Which means that, I don't know how Rava knew this, but he understood that there was a wrong thing to do. So the Gemara says, 1 second, why was it wrong? But 1 second, Rami Bar Chama was correct in doing so, because Menashe bar Tachlifa, he may have been Korav Shana, but he wasn't, he may have learned, the psukim, and he may have learned the mishnayos and the midrashim, but he didn't have Gemara on his belt, and therefore it makes sense why Rami Bar Chama here is just following the halacha that Rav Huna stated. The Gemara answers, no, Shani Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa to mashmeluhu l'Rabbanan. Actually, it's not true. Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa, he actually was an apprentice. He did do Shemesh Talmidei Chachamim, and Rami Bar Chama didn't know about it, and that's why he was punished by his death, according to Rava. Now, another way of saying, another version of this is, he heard the Gemara from the mouths of the rabbis, and he learned them, and that's why he's considered like a Talmid Chacham. And either way, it was an error on behalf of Rami Bar Chama that he didn't understand really who Reb Menashe bar Tachlifa was. Now, going back to the next thing in the Mishnah, obviously if a person ate untithed crops, you can't make a zimun, it's not kosher food. Pshita, it's obvious. Eloi, tzricha, no. It's needed, but tevel tul midrabanan. It's talking about where already, according to Torah law, the crop is fine, but it still needs to take trumas and ma'asos rabbinically. And what would that be? What would be a case of that? What's that case? In a potted plant that is not got holes at the bottom. The halacha is that when you have a potted plant and there are holes on the bottom, we consider it attached to the ground. But if the bottom is completely sealed, we look upon it as being not within the ground, and therefore it's not part of Eretz Yisrael. There's no obligation of the trumas and ma'asos according to the actual letter of the law, and this is the kind of rabbinical truma that you'd think, and ma'aseh, that you'd think if you don't keep it, you could still join in zimun, and our Mishnah teaches us otherwise. What about ma'aseh rishon? Pshita, obviously if you haven't taken ma'aseh rishon, you can't make a zimun. No, tzricha, it's needed. A little bit like what we said previously at the top of the page, that the Levi came before, and previously we said the Levi came, he took it from the stalks, and then we said that's okay, he doesn't need to separate truma gedola based on the pasuk. Over here we're saying he got to the point where it had already been made into a pile, and above we said that the obligation of truma rests when it becomes something called dogon. Dogon means a pile, and that's when the kohen's domain rests over the crop. So over here, if the Levi went ahead and took his ma'aser rishon before the kohen had taken truma, so in this case, he does have to take truma gedola as well as trumas ma'aser. Could popular by you would have thought like Papa's Dabaya that we should learn out from the pasuk that the Levi doesn't have to separate it once it's already been taken. And it comes to teach us the way that Abaye answered that there's a difference between when you take it when it's attached to the stalks and when you take it when it's already in a pile. Now we're going to Ma'aser Sheni. So now Ma'aser Sheni, which is we said that if it hadn't been redeemed, that you can't make a mizum. Well, of course not. It's not kosher. Loi, tzricha, sheniftu v'loi niftu. It was redeemed, but it wasn't redeemed. Niftu v'loi niftu kirchosna. It wasn't redeemed in the right way. Ma'aser Sheni, in the case of Ma'aser Sheni, what would that be? That you redeemed it on a token, not on a coin, on just a flat piece of metal disc which hasn't got a imprint on it. And in regard to Ma'aseh Sheni, that doesn't work because Rahman Amar v'tzarta kesef biyadecha, which literally means, and you should bundle up the money in your hand. But we learn out from the word v'tzarta that it refers to kesef she yesh olav tzura. It's only talking about money that has on it an imprint. If it's just a flat disc, you can't redeem Ma'aseh Sheni onto it, and that's what we were referring to over here. You may have thought you could, you cannot, and that's why you can't join in the zimun. It's not considered good food. Hekdesh, and what about Hekdesh? When is it that on Hekdesh you may have thought it's kind of redeemed, but you still can't do it? That's Shechil al Gabe Karka. When you redeemed the Hekdesh, you took the Kedusha of Hekdesh onto land, and you didn't do it onto money. Whereas in regard to Hekdesh, the Torah requires you to redeem it onto money and not onto land. Now, what about Vashamash Acha Pachas Kazais? What about the Mishnah says that when the Shamash ate let's in the Kazais, he can't join in Zimun? Pshita, that's obvious. The Gemara says, yeah, you're right. I did Tanya Reisha Kazais, Tanya Sefer Pachas Kazais. Since the Reisha said Kazais, the Sefer taught me less in the Kazais in order to create symmetry between the beginning and the end part of the Mishnah. And you can't make a zimun with a non-Jew. Pshita, that's obvious. In the Gemara, so what we're dealing with over here, we're talking about a convert that decided to convert to Judaism, and he actually went through the circumcision process. He had not yet gone through the immersion in a mikveh process. That Reb Zera says, a person doesn't become a convert until he has gone through the process of a bris milah and also a tevilah and immersion. And as long as he hasn't had that final immersion, he remains non-Jewish. Even though he's decided to be Jewish, he's had a bris milah, you need the tevilah to seal it. You can't make a zimun with women, slaves, and minors. There should be Rabbi Asi. When you have a baby in his cot, you can use him as part of the zimun. The Gemara asks in part 2, we learned in our Mishnah that Nashim, women, slaves, and some minors, you can't make them for zimun. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Asi was going in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Levi, which was a very specific point. Doesn't mean that the cotton can actually join in a zimun. Where was it relevant? Rabbi Shimon Levi. Even though they said a little baby that's put into a cot, a crib, you cannot use him in a zimun. Sorry, you can make him a branch to 10, which means if you've got 9 people and you want to say the Elokeinu, the name of Hashem, in the Birkas Hamazon, and then you have a baby in a carriage nearby, you can join him in. Meaning, if he's in their room, that's enough to make a bracha v'lekeinu. Now, why? I mean, what is that? It definitely can't be because he's participating from a cognizant and aware point of view. He has no idea what's going on. He's a little child. So why is it that his body being there is somehow helpful? And we're about to hear a few other Gemaras like this now, and all of them we'll be asking ourselves the question of what actually is the tipping point to create a platform where you can say Lekenu or David in a minyan. What do you need to be there? And even in Mizuman, as we'll see at the end of the page, can be ready. You can create spiritual entities without people being there, as we're about to see. Rabbi Shimon Levi, Tisha v'Eved mitztarfin. Rabbi Shimon Levi has another statement, and we're going to restart our counting. 9 people and an Eved who has not been redeemed, has not been let free, which is an Eved Knani, that means a non-Jewish slave, that when he becomes the slave of a Jewish person, he has to go through both a bris milah, if it's a man, and an immersion. But when he emerges from the immersion, he has not got the status of a Jew, but the status of what's called an Eved Knani, a Canaanite slave, which means he's obligated to keep mitzvahs in the same way that a woman is obligated to keep mitzvahs. So this person, we can join him as a 10th person in minyan, meaning if you had 5 avodim and 5 Jews, that would not work. He can only work as one to complete the minyan. The Gemara asks a kasha from the Zmeisvei, a group of Amoraim, asked a kasha on Reb Shimon Levi, Ma'aser Reb Eliezer, there was a case of the Reb Eliezer shenichnas lebeis hakneses. He went to shul v'lo masa asara, and there were not 10 people there. V'shicher avdoi v'shlimoy la'asara, and therefore he set his slave free, and that completed the minyan, which means shicher in, he set them free. Yes, then they can work to count him as a minyan. Lo shicher lo, but if he didn't free him, then he wouldn't. And this is a direct kasha on Reb Shimon Levi. In part 3, he gives a teretz. He goes, Trei itztrichu. Actually, in the case of Rebbe Eliezer, there were short 2 people. And Rebbe Eliezer had 2 slaves. Shichar echad v'nafik b'chad. So he freed one of them, and he fulfilled the mitzvah with the other who wasn't freed to complete the minyan. The Gemara asks a kasha in part 4. V'hechi avid hachi v'amar Rabbi Yehuda. How could Rebbe Eliezer have freed his slaves? Did not Rabbi Yehuda say, Kol meshachar avdo over ba'aseh? If a person frees his slave, he transgresses a positive commandment. Shenemar l'olam be'em ta'avodu. Forever you shall in them enslave. Meaning, once a person's slave, he should remain a slave for life. You should not free him. It's a positive commandment to continue to enslave him. The Gemara answers in part 5, Ledvar mitzvah shani. When it comes to mitzvah, it's different. You can free him for a mitzvah. So the Gemara asks a kasha in part 6, mitzvah ba'aba aveiri. How can you do that? You're doing a mitzvah through an aveira. That's not allowed. The Gemara answers in part 7, mitzvah derabim shani. When it's a mitzvah that the masses are going to benefit from, for example, over here in a minyan, that's going to be different. Now, why is it different? Why is it legitimized? How does it work? It is indeed, for me, a riddle. Continues the Gemara, a new Gemara. V'amar Shimon Levi. We just going with Reb Shimon Levi at this point in time. L'olam yashkim adam lebeis hakneses kadei shizkeh v'yimnei masar rishonim. A person should get to shul early in order that he should merit and be counted amongst the first 10. Shafilu me'ah b'ay macharav. Even if 100 people come afterwards, kibel olav schar kulam. He gets all of their reward. The Gemara asks in part 2, schar kulam sal kedaitach. He gets the reward of everyone? How can it be? They get nothing. Elo, the Gemara says in part 3, Ema noislin lo ischar kneged kulam. He will get the reward as if, like all of them, meaning they'll all get their own reward, but he'll get the reward not of one person, but of 100. New halacha. Amar Rav Huna, Tisha v'Aron mitztarfim. If you have 9 people in a minyan and you have it in a shul, so there's an Aron Kodesh with the Sefer Torah inside, the Aron Kodesh can stand in place of a 10th person. Amar le Rav Nachman v'Aron gavrahu. What says Rav Nachman? Is the ark a man? How can that be? Elo Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna reneges and he says what he meant was, or he either goes back on what he says or he redefines what he says. It sounds like he's going back on what he says. Tisha nirin kasar mitztarfin. So what Rav Huna meant was, if you've got 9 people and they look like there are 10, so that's okay. And there's Amila Kim Khanfi. Some people say, when do they look like they're 10? When they all gather together. But Amila Kim Vajran, other people say that when they separated, it looks like there's more of them. Now, this is a bizarre halacha. I mean, if you need 10 people for a minyan, so like, who are you kidding over here? Hashem sees that there's 9 people. So, to the kind of the casual observer, he can't differentiate between 9 and 10. How does that help me? It is indeed bizarre. Amar Rabbi Ami, Shnayim b'Shabbos mitztarfin. So Rabbi Ami says a new halacha that if you are 2 people eating together and it's on Shabbos, so Shabbos can be the third party. Amar le Rav Nachman v'Shabbos gavru. Rav Nachman again astonished, says, is Shabbos a person that you can count them? Elo Amar Rabbi Ami, rather Rabbi Ami says, which is such a strange shift over here. He didn't mean Shabbos, he meant Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, 2 sages of the Torah, who are sharpening each other in discussions of halacha, mitztarfin. They can join together. In other words, when there are 2 Talmidei Chacham learning, 2 chavrusas, you and your chavrusa learning, so that's enough for a zimun, which means you're learning over the meal. Now, I'm just going to suggest something. I normally leave things open, but this I relate to. When you and I are learning as a chavrusa, because we put things on the table and talk about them, and we thrash them out, and I say this, and you say this, and we discuss them, what actually occurs is I get out of my way of thinking, you get out of your way of thinking, and a third pshat emerges. It's almost as if there's a third entity in the room. And that's why we can join him in this third new Chiddush Torah that we created through the efforts of both of us as part of our Zimun. How cool is that? Haven't seen that, but that's what I think the pshat is. Now, who are these Talmidei Chachamim that are mechadin oisim b'shmaisa mach Rav Chisda could go in honor of Rav Sheshes? Rav Chisda says, like me and Rav Sheshes, mach Rav Sheshes could go in honor of Rav Chisda, and Rav Sheshes said the same thing, me and Rav Chisda. Now, I'm not quite sure what the Gemara is trying to say. Does it mean you have to be at that level? According to what I've just told you, it would be any two serious people learning up a sugya. It should work. So why do we need to have Rav Sheshes and Rav Chisda pointing out that's like them? I'm not sure. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Says Rav Yochanan, a new halacha. Cotton pereach. Now we're going to go with Rashi. Rashi's cotton pereach is a child, a minor, that in order for a child to be considered a major, he needs two conditions. He needs to have what's called shtei sairos, 2 pubic hairs, and he also needs to have shonim, years. He needs to be 13 years old when talking about a male. For the female, it's 2 pubic hairs and 12 years. So when he has these hairs, but he doesn't have the years, that's called cotton perech. He's flowering, but he hasn't got there yet. So what about him? Can he join in a zimun or not? Yes, you can join him in the zimun. Tanya Namiach. We have a brayso to support this in part 2. Cotton shehevi shtei sairos mezamnin olav. A young child that's brought through 2 pubic hairs, you can join him in the zimun. V'shelo yehevi shtei sairos ein mezamnin olav. But if he hasn't got 2 sairos, you can't make a zimun with him. V'ein medaktikim b'cotton. But we don't really, we're not exacting with the cotton. So the Gemara asks, Ha gufa kasha. This is internally contradictory. Amar tevish tesaris in lo hevi lo. You already made the kind of the criteria is he needs to have 2 saris, and if not. For the tanya medakting that we don't really check, we don't really care. So the Gemara says la suyama. What is it coming to include? Lav la suya cotton perech. Surely it's coming to include a child that has got two pubic hairs, which means it would be consistent of the ratio. You need 2 pubic hairs. If you have them, you do. If you don't have them, we can't mitzvah. But if you have them, you can mitzvah. And we're not medaktek to make sure that the guy is 13 years old. If you're not sure if he's 13 or not, if he's got 2 big hairs, we go with it and we join him in the zimun, and that draws to a close this fantastic Gemara on Mem Zayin and with Amud Beis, ready to kind of launch forward into Mem Ches and with Aleph. Just, all Gemaras are great. It just gets better and better. Keep on going.